Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Voices of the River, a webinar series hosted by Evenlode Catchment Partnership. My name is Sam Frith on behalf of Earthwatch Europe.
And I'm Jennifer Lanham on behalf of Cotswold National Landscape.
And today we are absolutely delighted to have Tony Bostock with us from the Riverfly Trust, presenting on how riverfly monitoring by citizen scientists like yourselves can then indicate for overall river health. Tony has worked in fisheries and environmental management for 43 years. As a chartered environmentalist, his knowledge and experience make him the perfect go-to expert for the Evenlode Catchment Partnership. He is well known locally for his volunteer work as a riverfly tutor and the Cotswolds Hub coordinator. But he's also president of the Wildfish Conservation UK. And a fellow of the Institute of Fisheries Management. And notably, Tony has received a well-deserved MBE from the Queen at Windsor Castle in April 2016 for his services to fisheries and the environment. So a very, very exciting person to be speaking to. Thank you so much, Tony, and welcome.
Oh, that's great, Sam. Thanks very much. I think you have to write my headstone. I think that sounds... And I just want a short story. I played table tennis with my grandson last week, and he said, "Granddad, you got a medal, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I did. I got that from the Queen at Windsor Castle." He said, "Oh yeah, Queen Victoria." I said, "Look, I am old, but not that old." There we go. So shall I crack on then, Sam?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. Fantastic introduction, probably far more than I deserve. Just wanted to touch on firstly about the work of Rivers Trust. And there's a Rivers Trust now operating in probably every catchment in the UK and in Ireland now. It's a growing group, probably one of the fastest growing environmental groups in Europe still. And they do lots of work. I'm not going to read through lots of slides, but I think the Rivers Trust is known as doers. They just get the job done, whether it's fish passes, habitat restoration, education, agriculture, whatever. They just get the job done. So I guess that's the only claim to fame of Rivers Trust, but do great work and get involved with lots of volunteer and community groups and, of course, catchment partnerships. Personally, I'm involved with the Windrush Catchment Partnership on a small scale. And I guess that work really is always so rewarding, and get involved with tree planting and river cleanups and obviously riverfly monitoring and removing invasive species, all that kind of stuff. And really is rewarding work. One of my pet issues is soil and soil loss. It's along with air and water, it's probably the most important commodity on the planet. And not to read through this whole slide, but this is just an example of all of the ecosystem services that that soil gives us, and it really needs to be looked after. It does, and I think we are eventually starting to look after it. But it's been a real struggle, and I've used this slide since 2015, which was the International Year of the Soil. And they were taken over a 6-year period. And as you can see, in year 1, we got a bit of soil compaction. Things were starting to go wrong. Year 2, there's a gully forming. Year 3, it's getting bigger and bigger, and the farmer's losing his crop, using his fertilizers, and all that soil's getting washed away until we get to year 6, when that gully is 20 feet wide and 10 feet deep. And where does all this go? Well, of course, it ends up in our rivers. And I coined this phrase, we treat soil like dirt. And I'm afraid until recently, we do. We've lost 30% of our topsoil, as it says, in the last 40 years. And its rate of loss is increasing all of the time. And not to read through it all, but it costs a hell of a lot of money. And at the end of the day, it takes around 2,000 years to replace about 100 millimeters or 4 inches of topsoil. So when it's gone, it's gone. And people did tell us that we reckoned we'd only got about 6 decades of soil left before it had disappeared. And I was told recently that they reckon it's now 45 harvests. And when 45 harvests have gone, most of our topsoil is going to be gone. So, we are taking action, but it's very slow. And as you can see right at the bottom there, we've still been waiting since February last year for a soil health action plan. And I guess with the change of government, these things have been slowed up even more, but it's getting more and more important. As is this, what I call sewerage confetti. And a lot of this is farm plastics and that kind of thing, but it is something we can all help with. We shouldn't be putting wet wipes and things like that down the sinks and the toilets. It's bad news. And we see this, well, all over the country. And it really is a disaster. These are just a couple of shots recently I took of discharges when the weather was fine. And they are illegal discharges. And I've just added a couple of notes, which I find quite frightening, to be honest. Last year on the River Colne, just from Fairford, they discharged raw sewage on 163 occasions. That's 3,391 hours, which equates to 141 days. And that's just from one sewerage works. If you look at the Windrush, from 3 sewerage works in 2023, they released sewage untreated for 4,782 hours. That's 302 continuous days. And it's got to end. And, I guess the public are getting more and more attuned and involved with this, but it's going to take a long time to resolve. It is. And unfortunately, all of our rivers, virtually all of our rivers, are in a real state currently. Every single river in the UK is polluted chemically in some form. However, if you look at the Water Framework Directive and our area, Thames are the worst. Only 3% of our rivers in the Thames area reach good ecological status. And that to me is only a basic measure. So it's bad news all round. They are saying, or did say, by 2027, 55% of our rivers in the Thames area would be in good ecological status. Unfortunately, it's just not going to happen. And in fact, Thames Water were recently fined £104 million because of some of these issues. However, it's very unlikely they'll ever pay any of that money over. And even if they did, the problem with that is that money just disappears in the exchequer. It does not come back into paying for the infrastructure that's required, the cleanup that's required, and repairing the damage that's been caused. The last government were preparing to change the legislation, so fines on water companies and for pollution incidents did come back to their local environment. But I'm afraid, again, with the change of government, whether that's going to happen, I don't know. But here's a couple of shots of the even load, which I thought were interesting. If you look back to the spring of 1994, look how clear on the top 2 pictures the even load was. Absolutely super. We've got weed growth, clear water. It looks really great. Unfortunately, those flow deflectors, those stone flow deflectors you can see in there were put in the wrong way around. We are looking at changing those. But if you look at the summer of 2022, just look at the turbidity in the water. It is absolutely awful. And currently it's not getting any better. But I just think that's a glaring example of what's happened in recent times. And people keep saying to us, the reason for all these sewage discharges are due to Victorian infrastructure. Well, crikey. Not long ago, Whitney was just 9 bungalows and a shed. It wasn't Victorian at all, but there we go. I see lots of other things when I'm walking around the catchment, things like this, a ring feeder right on the banks of a river, which, you know, is bad news. And you can see exactly what's behind those cattle. It just goes straight down into the river. There is a dung heap there as well, which is obviously legal and should be at least 100 meters away from the river. But, you know, we see these things. Thankfully, when we highlight them to farmers, they usually get involved and do things about it. But I'm afraid it's an uphill battle. It is. And I often see things like this. This is open cast sheep mining, I think. There's not a blade of grass on the farm. And again, it all ends up in the river. And you see damage like this. The farmer there has tried to prevent the sheep getting into the river, but quite unsuccessful. And of course, when the river flows are high, all this washes into the river. This was another instance where a farmer I went to see, he said, well, I've got to get my cattle across the river to graze on the opposite side. So I need to do something. So we built him a bridge, as simple as that, and fenced out the livestock. We had to add some stone at the entrance to the bridge eventually because they were starting to churn that up. But the difference immediately was fantastic. This is on the Sherborne Brook, not all that far from us in the Windrush catchment. And this is where the livestock have broken down the banks completely and over-widened the channel. And you see that little clump of vegetation in the background. That's how wide the river should be. So together with the Cotswold Wildlife Trust and the Cotswold Fly Fishers, we put a line of faggots in, but that's just the bottom of the river at that time. So we've got this line of faggots in and fenced out the livestock, and you can see the river is already going back to its former width, and there's marginal habitat growing straight away. And with 18 months later, this is what it looked like, a completely different river. And there were fish and invertebrates back in that stretch that weren't there before. So, you know, a great success story for not a lot of money and a little bit of volunteer help. This kind of thing I still see, and people do not realise that this is completely illegal. There were new regulations to prevent watercourses that came in on the 1st of April 2018, which clearly says that livestock should be fenced out of watercourses and about 5 meters back from the top of the bank. So this kind of thing is still illegal. Although if you ask the Environment Agency, who are the enforcement body, they still have not prosecuted anybody yet. So again, it's a problem. And this is what you see after that. And this is just a small area where the livestock have poached the banks and defecated in the river, destroyed the habitat. And we see a lot of this kind of stuff we do. And this is a couple of pictures I took recently. These are on protected ancient water meadows. And it's a National Trust property. And within 1 week of letting the cattle in, you can see what's happened. It's just awful, absolutely awful stuff. So we still see all that. We are trying to combat it. And this is just a picture of a whole farm plan that we produce, which is confidential to us and the farmer, which gives him lots of ideas and direction on what he should do. And usually, as a Rivers Trust, we've got a little bit of money in our back pockets to help, and he needs to fence out all those watercourses we've marked in red, all these fields that are sloping down to watercourses in yellow. You know, we need him to look at his harvesting and his planting on those fields and all that kind of thing. As I said, these plans are confidential to us and the farmer. However, if he does refuse to do any of this work, then of course we have an obligation to actually report some of these things. And it is a delicate balance, I have to say. We've got a little publication, which I think you can still download as a low resolution copy, and it's called Water Friendly Farming Guide. This was done for the Severn catchment. We did one for the Team catchment, and there's been one for the Ribble, elsewhere in the country, but the format is exactly the same. Simple things that you can do to protect rivers and save farmers money, and which is good farming practice as well. Just again, a couple of examples where if you look at the two pictures on the left-hand side, looking upstream and downstream. The river's completely overshaded, fence is falling down. So we let some light in, we fence back from the river to give marginal growth. And again, fish and invertebrates and habitat improved immensely in no time. And the two pictures on the right, the top picture shows where the sheep have broken the bank down, and we just simply fenced that off. And you can see the marginal growth is back. We've got rabbits and butterflies and everything you can think of in that marginal habitat. So it improved dramatically. Thankfully, I don't see this so often now, thankfully. But it has been an issue. But again, you know, with a bit of education and not a lot of work, you know, we can remedy that. And that's what it looked like 18 months later. We'd fenced out the livestock, did a bit of seed planting, and you can see the improvement is absolutely phenomenal. Similar again, the chappie here was about to lose his shed into the river at the bottom of his garden, and not the kind of thing we'd want to do. But again, we felled that tree across, fenced out the livestock, graded the bank a little bit, and again, that looked like 18 months later. So a tremendous difference. Here again, the livestock you can see on the top left-hand picture, broken it all down. There was no spawning habitat. They destroyed everything. And we simply fenced this out and put a few small, very small flow deflectors on the bottom of the stream. So when the river is very low, like it is on the top right-hand picture, we've always got a small flow of water with a good flow velocity to keep the gravel clean. And the vegetation comes back in no time, and you've still got the same flood capacity. So again, simple things. And again, bottom right picture there, banks broken down, fenced it out, put stakes in, filled it with brash, and the difference in no time, just fantastic. Barriers are a big problem throughout all of the catchments in the UK. This is on the Windrush. They hold back sediment, they cause impoundments above, they prevent migration of invertebrates and fish, both upstream and downstream, and their access to spawning habitat is depleted. And upstream, of course, the habitat is completely degraded. This is something that is a major issue when, of course, we get beaver dams, because beavers do completely block off rivers. And at the moment, DEFRA have said they will not issue any more permits for wild beaver releases until we can get a picture of what really happens. It'd be great if you could put beavers in the uplands and they could hold back water in the uplands, but of course we can't keep them where we want them to be. So I guess the jury's out on further introductions. And here we've got weirs that we can't take out, which is the best option. And we put either technical fish passes in or bypass channels, which are a better option. But the best option of all, as in this case, is to remove the weir completely. It looks a bit raw there on the right-hand side, but it soon vegetates up, as you've seen from previous pictures, and migration and habitat gets restored pretty quick. And we do have to build some big fish passes on some locations. This is directly below the castle in Ludlow, where it's a listed structure. And as you can see from the guys there working in the river, it was a big project. And that's called a Larinia fish pass. You can see from the central bottom picture, it's got what's called a Larinia pass, which is baffles on the bottom, which slow the water velocity down to less than about 1.5 meters per second. And then it can be accessed by fish, invertebrates, crayfish, eels, everything. So great stuff. Not to be confused with woody debris dams. And this is a little bit of a raw picture after one was installed, but this is a really good example. People think when you put woody debris dams in, that they're to hold water back, but they're not at all times. As this picture shows, when you've got low water, there is no obstruction whatsoever. The value is when the water level rises and it holds water back. But that's the key. In low flows, it shouldn't hold any water back. And that's the problem. People don't quite understand that. They think it's got to be a dam and cause an impoundment upstream at all times. That's not the case. So that's a good example. And these are just small things that we do on a regular basis, working with volunteers on a Thursday every week, putting flow deflectors in rivers to speed up the flow, cause more diverse habitat. You can see they're always facing upstream. And on the one there on the right-hand side, the gap in the middle that produced, this was just on the River Colne, where it was 6 inches deep all the way across. Uniform channel, little habitat. So we put these two deflectors in, and the central channel scours out a deep hole, which becomes lies for fish and gives us that diversity in flow. And when they face upstream, of course, they force the flow into the centre of the river, which is very important. I've seen some flow deflectors put in downstream. Well, of course, they deflect the flow to the river banks and cause erosion, which you don't want. So that's just small things. Bankside revetment, where banks have been broken down and eroded away. We just put lines of stakes in and fill them in with brash. And eventually, water flows into those areas. And if it's heavily sedimented, that sediment drops out and rebuilds the bank over a period of time. So, initially it's great for fry and invertebrates as habitat, but eventually it reestablishes the banks. Here's a little project that we did not so long ago on road runoff. We were very concerned that triple SI was being polluted from road runoff. So we did an experiment after a heavy rainfall incident, and we put 4 bottles in the river, 1 a kilometre upstream of the road, 1 directly upstream, 1 directly downstream, and 1 a kilometre downstream. And you can see the dark coloured bottle, of course, was the one directly downstream of the road, and the stuff that was in that was horrible stuff. Arsenic from car tires and all that kind of stuff. So we had to put in some settling lagoons below. But you can get, or you used to be able to get, funding for these kind of projects from Highways England, from their environment designated fund. But whether that's still running, I'm not quite sure. And another little project we ran, which I got really excited about, was for dippers, which the numbers had declined dramatically on the River Team in Shropshire, which is the Severn's second largest tributary. What we did initially was to put nest boxes on all the bridges where there were not dipper nests. There's 146 boxes. Within 3 years, we'd got 146 dipper nests. So it was a great success. What we found was where water quality was good, invertebrate numbers were good, fish numbers were good, dipper numbers were good. So it just showed how intertwined the ecosystem was and how important it is to have those 3 things linking together. Conversely, where water quality was poor, fish numbers poor, invertebrate numbers poor, dipper numbers were poor. We did have a slight problem because we generated all these nest boxes which were all used, and the dipper numbers increased dramatically. However, then we highlighted a problem. Had we overpopulated the river because there was not enough food available to support that number of birds? Because what we found was the average weight of the bird over a period of time was starting to decline. And we thought, have we just overpopulated? But we hadn't. When we had some deaths and we did some autopsies, what we found was the poor old dipper was ingesting up to 200 microplastics a day, and hence the problem. So microplastics now in the environment, of course, recently highlighted, but a big problem. On to riverflies. Some of you know we run a riverfly program, training volunteers to look at riverflies. a really important part and component of the environment, as you can see from those two charts. Been a continuous decline over the last 50 years, although I did listen to a parliamentary session not so long ago where it was claimed that our river invertebrates had increased by about 9% in the last 10 years. Where they got that information from, I have no idea. And so I challenged it. It turned out they had increased, but they were only measuring to family group, to taxa group, and not down to individual species. If you did that, obviously it showed the decline. So we love to go out and train people. We have a lot of fun days on the workshops. So far since 2008, trained 931 people. I'd love to get to 1,000 before I retire, which I should have done years ago, but we shall see. It is the largest volunteer monitoring group in the UK. And just in the Cotswolds alone, we now have 90 sites registered on 31 different rivers and streams. So it's been a pretty exciting project, and it's moved on to other things now in terms of species level monitoring and water sampling and all those kind of things. So it's been an exciting program, which we're proud of, and hope that more people will sign up. No pressure on anybody. They're fun days, and we've run these workshops for community groups, anglers, scouts, schools, everybody you can think of that's got an interest, and just great fun. Here's one from the Even Load, ran, I think, last year. This is in Charlbury. Just wanted to show these pictures because you can see from the top. Well, if you look at the bottom right-hand picture, if you look, I'm in the river there trying to do a sample. If you look to the left of that picture, you can see the water behind me is fairly clear, highlighted even more with the top right-hand picture. That's the little mill stream coming in, and the water there is crystal clear. But look at the main Even Load, and that turbidity, absolutely awful. And I just wanted to use those pictures as an example. I mean, we had a good day; it was great fun. But again, you can see the turbidity in the Even Load was absolutely awful. And these are things we look for. These little critters, stoneflies, mayflies. That stonefly there, the biggest picture there on the top left, flat-bodied nymphs at the bottom, mayfly nymph there, top right. Right at the very top left-hand corner is a case caddis and a shrimp next to it. Great to enjoy these things. We look for 8 different groups. These were chosen, for the habitats they were prolific in, and also their susceptibility to pollution. I don't go through all of them, but just as an example, the flat-bodied stonefly nymphs, top centre there, they frequent the upland, stony, fast-flowing streams. Don't tend to find them very much in the Cotswolds. They do occur, but not so many. But the bottom picture, the blue-winged olive, is a favourite of mine, and is highly susceptible to phosphate. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then the gammarus, the freshwater shrimp, are highly susceptible to pesticides. So that's what they were chosen for. And we have great fun looking for these and for cased and uncased caddis on our workshops. But I did say the blue-winged olive was one of my favourites, was prolific years ago and has much declined since. And that's an adult, called a blue-winged olive because he's got these slaty blue wings. And as I said before, was really prolific years ago. That's the nymph. Again, he's got very distinctive bars on the tails, bars on the legs. He's got a hobby horse action when he swims. Fascinating thing. Unlike all of the others, they spend the winter in diapause. So their eggs don't hatch out like the other invertebrates within a month. And they sit in the river. They start to develop and then sit in the river as eggs for about 183 days. And where phosphate levels are high, of course, it kills the eggs. And you can see as phosphate increases, the mortality rate on the eggs It goes up and up and up. And you want 0.05 of a milligram per litre, really, to be good for them. Once it goes above that, they decline dramatically. And as I said before, I think everybody's seen freshwater shrimps from their pond and jam jars from when they were young, I guess. But of course, we get the invasive species now, which are a real problem. But if you want to learn more about river flies, then we're quite happy to run workshops. We're hoping to have one planned, I think, late October or maybe early November this year, somewhere in the even load. And you can buy the brochure that's at the top there is a Field Study Council leaflet, which is really fascinating thing. We use that in schools. The bottom left-hand picture, Guide to Freshwater Invertebrates, is the actual Bible. All of the statutory bodies and ourselves use that. Very detailed keys. You'll get down to species level for everything. There's also specialist books on mayflies, which is the right-hand brochure. And the one in the middle is the leaflet, the fold-out leaflet you get when you attend one of the Riverfly workshops. You can't buy those. You have to attend the workshop to get one of those. So yeah, you can get lots and lots of information like that. I did say before about the invasive species. I have to be really careful with these. We do need to clean, check and dry. These are much, much bigger than our native shrimps. They feed on invertebrates and fish fry, so they're bad news whenever we see those. Sadly, in some of our urban rivers, we now see more of these than we see of the native shrimp. And we come across these fellas occasionally, the signal crayfish. They are a problem with a lot of rivers, particularly even on the even load and the Glyne. There's so many of them. They burrow into banks, they cause turbidity. So they are a factor in causing turbidity in the river. And again, they are bad news to our native crayfish because they carry the crayfish spores, the crayfish disease spores that they're immune to, but of course they do kill our natives. So clean, check and dry is the message with all of your equipment when you're in the river. And one thing I did want to add before I forget, if you use flea treatments on your dog, do not throw him in the river because fipronil is highly toxic to invertebrates, and we've had lots of issues where near bathing water where people throw their dogs in. We've had major declines in invertebrates because of that. We work with schools a lot with fly life monitoring. It fits in well with the curriculums, both in the classroom and out on the riverbank. It's a great joy to take kids out. We always say we don't want our children going to the rivers for health and safety. So I usually set up all the information on the riverside benches and that kind of thing. We have great fun with those doing lots of exercises for English, maths and science, which is great. We're trying not to keep them out of the water, but I'm afraid it's a losing battle. And once one gets in the river, particularly if they catch a fish, oh, you try keeping them out. And they're usually over their tops, their wellies in no time. And it's, yeah, just great fun. And they may not become anglers or riverfly monitors in the future, but they'll certainly be far more aware of what's around. They really will. To finish with a couple of projects on the even load, which we'd like to complete. Years ago, we dug out a refuge at Dean Grove near Catcham Bridge, which looks very bare there, but you can see from the bottom picture, it vegetated over very quickly. The problem is now, if you look at the right-hand bottom picture, the entrance to that refuge is now been overgrown. So we need to open that up so it's accessible to fish and invertebrates during all river levels. And the top right-hand picture is where we introduced some gravel years ago to cause or to create some diversity in the flow. And we now need to go back and remodify that. So lots of little projects. We're working at Grintley Hill as well on the even load and Able Woods, which are great projects, which we hope to deliver this summer. I think that's pretty much it. I could go on and on. We're hoping I haven't bored people to death, but I hope that's been of interest to some. If not, I can only apologise, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Tony. That was really, really good. The amount of projects and the extent of work that you've done is really, really fascinating. I had a couple of questions that I was kind of coming up with. Well, from an EC point of view, for community outreach, I was wondering about the Severn Catchment water-friendly farming card that you had. Is that something that is owned or copyrighted by the Rivers Trust? And is it something that we might be able to edit and use as well?
Yes, certainly can. It was originally copyrighted, but only because of the pictures that were copyrighted by the guy that took them. But since then, we got round that. We paid him a one-off sum to get round that. And lots of people, we were the first people to use that. We had one for the River Team, which focused on dippers, as I've already explained. And then we created one for the River Severn.
Mm-hmm.
Then other people edited it and made it applicable to their catchment. So there's one now for the Ribble, the Eden, all over the country. So they've edited it and added pictures to suit their particular catchments. You can find, I think, still a low resolution copy, possibly on the Severn Rivers Trust site. If you can't, let me know. I don't have any hard copies left now. I used to give them out when I did a Riverfly workshop, but we've not reprinted any. But if you do want a low resolution copy, see if you can download it. If not, let me know, and I'll get one to you anyway.
Yeah, I do know that there's just been interest again in kind of whether or not, as far as the legality, I was told recently that that it was a recommendation that cattle and livestock were not allowed to go to the river, but that it wasn't actually a hard and fast law.
Yeah.
So I think there's still a huge amount of confusion over that, and it's difficult to talk to farmers about it. You know, if you say it's illegal or you know, and it's not. So 100% it's illegal, or is it just a recommendation?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, because a number of times I've been to farmers and they say, oh, it's just guidance, as you just explained. Or even one said to me, oh, no, it's just down to stocking densities. So I contacted the director who's responsible at the environment saying, can you give me hard and fast? Is this are these guidelines, or is it a legal requirement? The answer was, it's a legal requirement. Our position is that we will go to a farm, or when we do a farm visit, which unfortunately is not very often, although they are recruiting, I think, about 50 new advisors to visit farms. And our policy is, if we see this, we issue a caution to the farmer. If we have to return and is not attended to those recommendations and obeyed the law, we then go through the courts and prosecute. Although as I said before, I didn't ask how many prosecutions has there been, and as yet, of course, none. But it is the hard and fast bottom line is it's the law, full stop.
So how would you recommend that you know, the average person deals with something like that if they're, you know, on a walk and they see cattle with, you know, regular or permanent opportunity to get into the river? How would you recommend they go about? Do they need to inform someone? Do they call the Environment Agency? What do they do?
Yeah, well, it is delicate. It is because sometimes, particularly as the Rivers Trust or anybody else or a catchment partnership, is working with farmers and obviously don't want to alienate them. So it is a delicate balance. But I'm afraid nowadays, I just tell people to ring the hotline number 0800 80 70 60 and report it and ask for an incident number. Now, in doing so, the Environment Agency, who are the enforcement body, will not come out immediately. The only time they now come out is if they see an actual fish kill. That's the only time. However, the more people that ring these issues in, and get an incident number, the higher it goes up the agenda.
Yeah.
And in the end, all of their work is now currently intelligent based because they don't go out so often for a number of reasons, manpower and other reasons. So the higher it gets up the agenda and the more intelligence they gather, then they get to a point where they have to act. So I always recommend ring that hotline number and get an incident number. And then it is recorded on the national system.
Okay. Yeah, we've actually designed some action cards for people which have those details on there for
That's
both
great.
the Environment Agency and also for Thames Water if there's a sewage leak.
Yeah.
But we also have on the back of the cards the actual emails where you can do your environmental information requests to both Thames Water and the Environment Agency if you're looking for, you know, more details. And those are something we try and hand out at every single outreach that we do to try and encourage people to do that. And I think recently the Environment Agency did kind of confess that they were becoming overwhelmed with these information requests and actually unwilling and unable to respond to them, which is you know, quite a big confession coming out of them.
It is, yeah.
That it means it's working. It is putting them under pressure, but again, you're right. It does mean that there will be more funding and focus in those areas if the demand is there. So it's actually really a positive thing, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. No, that's excellent. Though I'm pleased to hear you've got you know, information that you distribute to people. That's just a great way forward.
Yeah. Well, the more people that know, I think there just is a little bit of concern as far as how do you deal with farmers gently and not alienating them is really the overall challenge. But we just want the best for the river, don't we? We want to solve those problems. Yeah. And if there's funding available through organizations like the River Trust, then, you know, to actually make those changes, to create those cattle bridges, then, you know, everybody wins, don't they?
Indeed, they do. Yeah, that's right. And I think certainly the River Trust movement has been an advantage because usually if the Environment Agency or DEFRA or Natural England or the Ural Payments Association, when they go down the farm track, you know, it puts the barriers up straight away. With the Rivers Trust, of course, we have no regulatory authority whatsoever. And usually we're going down there just to advise. And as I think I've touched on, sometimes we've got money in our back pockets, which is always a great advantage.
Yeah. And along those lines, Tony, I was wondering, you mentioned some of the river restoration work. Is that something that actually people, citizen scientists or just average persons can get involved in with the Rivers Trust?
Absolutely, yes. There's just a growing number. I can't remember the total number of people who volunteer to help deliver some of these projects, but I mean, I know it's well into the tens of thousands. We might be across the country now into the hundreds of thousands of people. And there are people, there's more and more people becoming engaged all the time because I think awareness has been raised. That's simply why. And I think people are more concerned about the environment. I used to badger David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, you know, because he was always saying that, oh, we've got to look at education and the National Health Service and all this. That, David, if you don't look after the environment, we are all dead. Mankind is gone. That should be number one first. But as he rightly said, you are right, but I can't say that because I've got a general election to win in 3 years' time. People don't agree with that. So it's all short-termism, but I think the message gradually is getting through, but whether it will all happen in my lifetime, probably not. But at least if we're moving in the right direction, I'll be happy.
Yeah. So are there actually any projects going on in Evenlode that people could get involved with?
Well, certainly the ones we're going to deliver at Grintley Hill and Abel Woods, we will be asking for volunteers soon. 1 or 2 people have already signed up. They have. It's best to email the Cotswolds Rivers Trust directly, or Jack Knott, who is the director at I think it's just Jack Knott at cotswoldriverstrust.org. Because I think he'll certainly respond anyway.
Yeah, that's something that ever since I started my role with the ECP is I wanted to try and encourage people to actually get their hands dirty, you know, get in the river, get wet and help restore. But I haven't managed to get around to it. So if Jack has the potential opportunity, that would be a really great way to work alongside them. And we've got this concept of a river community, which is more of a catchment-based approach, whereby, you know, we don't, if the people down in Stonesfield in the Evenlode want to clean up their river, well, they've got to be communicating with every single community upstream.
Yeah.
And so, you know, kind of from top to bottom, trying to get all of those communities engaged. And, you know, the more people that get involved with actual restoration projects, I think, you know, it's really fulfilling, because when you're doing water quality samples and things like that, you're not actually seeing the change. You know, you're looking at chemical color changes, but you're not actually seeing the river change over the course of years. And it's something really practical I think people can get involved with. So I'd love to follow that up. So I will get a hold of Jack and pursue that a bit. Sam, sorry, did you? I'm dominating because I've written down a list of questions and talking points. I don't know if Chris or Anne had questions either, but I could keep going. So please do jump in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a subject that opens up so many questions, really. I guess for me, I live in quite a flashy area, so you know, most of the time it's a nice shallow little stream. But I do notice that it silts up very quickly. The benefit of it being flashy is actually it almost flushes all that sludge and sediment away, which then leaves me with a nice clean gravelly bottom. How is that affecting the water invertebrates? You know, are they able to cling on in these high flows, or are they just being washed downstream?
I mean, a lot do get washed downstream. They are quite clever, because obviously they're hugging the bottom of the stream most of the time. And of course, when flows are high, that's the area in the stream where the water velocity is still at its lowest. That's so they do quite well. Also, of course, under the hours of darkness, they actually migrate upstream as well, which is not a very well-known fact. Yes, they do tend to drift downstream, but under the hours of darkness, they migrate upstream. It's all about creating that environment that allows them to be able to cling on. So you do need some diversity in the channel, even when the river flows are high. And I said to a guy recently, I looked at his stretch of the river, and yeah, it looks like a nice little stream, but it was very uniform. And I said to him, you know, just drop a few logs in here and there, tag them down with reed bar or wire them or whatever which way you want to. Even throw in some random stones, not great big things, but just random stones. And you don't need to put them in as I've seen before, in a nice upstream horseshoe. You can do that, but just throwing them in randomly, it gives territories, not just to fish and invertebrates, but for everything else. And sometimes it helps with establishing aquatic weeds as well, like ranunculus, which is great, which harbours a lot of invertebrates and is sanctuary for fish too. So there are things you can do. Of course, what I always say is you need to stop all that sediment coming down from above. And that's where the soil loss and holding back the flow and leaky dams, of course, has the greatest benefit. But yeah.
And do people need to apply for a permit from the Environment Agency to put in changes to a main river like that?
Now, if it's a main river, yes, the Environment Agency are the authority. If it's not main river, and remember, that's not due to the size of the river. You can have a tiny stream that's classed as main river.
Yeah.
It was all done in the classifications years ago, down to flood defence. So if you're susceptible to flooding on a small stream, it could be a main river. So if it's not a main river, you have to apply to the local authority. They are the governing body then, which can be a pain, I have to say. Firstly, applying to the Environment Agency for a FRAP permit, they call it, can take up to 16 weeks and up to £185. If it's an ordinary watercourse, the local authority are supposed to charge £50. Although we got into one problem where the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, working with us, wanted to put in 20 flow deflectors on an ordinary watercourse. And the council wanted to charge them £50 per flow deflector.
Ouch.
So we complained and said to them, this is not the way forward. We're trying to do environmental good here. So they just charge £50. So that's the process. Main river, Environment Agency, ordinary watercourse, local authority.
Thank you.
That's good. Did that, Ann Miller's put in a question. Does that fully answer that?
Oh, I've not.
She
checked
said, what do you recommend for us to do where we are looking at side streams which are full of sediment? Can we sample effectively using Riverfly methods?
You can do, but of course you're only going to find a limited number of species. And in fact, if it's highly sedimented, there is a program, you know, we deliver the normal standard Riverfly workshop, looking for those 8 species.
Mm.
On rivers where they're heavily sedimented and they are really urban streams, we have an urban Riverfly. Because a lot of people say to us when we do a workshop, well, why don't you count these worms and snails and things like that? Well, on the urban Riverfly, we do that exactly. And in fact, on the extended Riverfly, which is 33 different species, it actually gives a score for everything, even turbidity and flow. So there's a whole range of Riverfly schemes that we can adapt to your particular environment or your particular stream. So don't give up if there's just a lot of sediment. It would be great to try and move some of that sediment on. It would once and for all. And I'd certainly try to do that by whatever means I can. But yeah, don't think that you've just got to sample those 8 that we're looking for under the standard Riverfly. We can adjust it to monitor the species that you're likely to find.
I think something we saw recently at we were doing a workshop on water quality testing, teaching people how to do that citizen science. And we touched a bit on the Riverfly. Sam was doing the water quality samples, looking at phosphates, nitrates, and turbidity. And I was looking at Riverfly, what we might find. And it was just at a confluence with the Little Millbrook and the Evenlode. The Millbrook was clear, it was crystal, it was beautiful. And what was surprising, and in contrast, I guess, to the Evenlode, which, you know, you couldn't see the bottom of, when I stepped in it, you know, to try and do the Riverfly, I went quickly up to my knees and thought, I'm not going in anymore. And that was just off the bank. But the contrast was really interesting between the 2 types of citizen science and surveying, because in the Millbrook, the phosphates and nitrates, I believe, were quite high. And equally, I found a good variety of invertebrates. But then in the Evenlode, I found no invertebrates, and the water quality there was actually better for phosphates and nitrates. So it was really interesting.
Yeah.
You can't actually just look at one without, you need them both to get a really good picture.
Yeah.
So it's really an eye-opener, I think, for us and for all of the people that were there. I think we had about 40 people there. So it was really, really good to be able to illustrate that just at that location. It was brilliant.
Yeah. I think somebody just asked a question about the extended Riverfly. Yeah, we're quite happy to deliver that. In fact, Owen has recently asked me if we'd run an extended course. Now, you don't have to go onto the river for that. There's 33 species, and it's run by 33 different 1-minute videos. That's all.
Oh,
so we can do that in a classroom. And if people want to sign up for that, I'd be really happy to run one of those. I would. The other thing with that, again, it does link together some of those other factors, because each of those 33 species on the extended Riverfly program, there is a score. And some of them, it's a minus score. So if you find, you know, lots of leeches and flatworms, it's a minus score in terms of water quality. And also with river flows as well. So it adjusts it. So when you get the full, it gives you a Riverfly standard Riverfly score and an extended Riverfly score, and also a water quality score and a turbidity and flow score as well. So it's far more involved and links together some of those things you just highlighted, which is great.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because again, I find my 8 when I do my Riverfly, but there's definitely lots of other species in there as well.
I've got a question now. Where you found the phosphate levels were high, did you find any few blue-winged olives? Did anybody find any?
No.
No, that's what. Well, that's what I'd expect to see.
Sorry.
A chap asked us where there was traditionally prolific blue-winged olives. So I want to get them reintroduced. And we were quite happy to work with him. But the first thing they had to do was say, can you please test for phosphate levels? So we've got a Hannah instruments, those things, and did the test. Of course, the phosphates were sky high. And I said, until we get that low enough, there's no way we can reintroduce. But it has worked on some rivers in the south where they've managed to get phosphate levels reduced, and they've managed to reintroduce blue-winged olives, and that project worked a treat. We did.
Oh, wow.
So it can work on the ground. It can.
We are rapidly coming to the end of our hour.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Tony, what a book has influenced you the most with regards to your fishing and environmental pursuits?
Yeah. Well, the first book I had to buy myself was a little book called Fishing Days by Geoffrey Bucknell. Delightful little book. And the only reason I bought it was I hadn't actually taken up fishing, was about to at that point, because my granddad wanted to take me. But I got that book because I won an award at school, I think for art or something diverse. And I got a book token, and I saw this book, and I think I've read it once a year since 1967. And it's just delightful. Talks about lots of different issues, not just about fishing, but the hammer ponds and this kind of thing in the southeast. And yeah, just a lovely, delightful book to read.
Wow, that sounds like one. I'm going to really start to create a library, I think, of all these great recommendations.
Yeah.
Is that more towards, is it a children's book then?
It's a little bit more than a children's book, but I'd certainly highly recommend it. I would, yeah.
Thank you so much, Tony. I always find your presentations really inspirational and remind me of little bits that I've forgotten that are really, really key and very important to remember. So thank you. I'm grateful that you were able to join us today and share all these details. Oh, we've got a dog hopping in. There's there's a Wookiee.
No, it's been a pleasure anyway.
Yeah, and I could quite happily talk to you all day about this, but unfortunately our hour has come to an end. So thanks again, and we will catch up soon.
And if anybody wants to come and see us at the Morton Show, we'll be there on Saturday. Talking all things river. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
everyone.
You're all the best then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.